MRC, and that seems to be an issue right now. And we're wondering if you have further information and what you think is going on and what we need to do uh, to really make sure we cover all of the people who need help because they are homeless at this point.
I I have because I'm moving into a place. I've been really distracted, and Kari has is more current on it. But MRM, in response to the parent investigation into Matt and into others working under him. They apparently have installed new people, at least on a temporary basis, to bring a new culture there. But my sense is that they really haven't changed much. Their board of directors, as far as I know, is the same, and they sat for years under Matt, or they should have been over Matt, but they sat and looked at what he was doing and listened to my complaints and others' complaints and did nothing. So Kari and I both, I think, at least intimated that the cultural change at MRM needs a board change as well.
Tell,
And
tell, tell us a little bit about what you did complain about. I'm a little bit familiar with that, but I'd really like to hear your version and what you think they should be doing and
well,
what are they not doing.
I got involved particularly in 2018 when Matt took over MRM, and then brought in the Leadership Foundation, put it under the Leadership Foundation of Billings. Back in 1973, when I was in Atlanta, worked for the two people who created that foundation, ironically. And spent 2 years correcting their bookkeeping and the way that they were handling money. Um, and ironically, that foundation was founded by them, and they're still on the national board. His bringing the Leadership Foundation here, and my looking at that nationally, and at the organizations under it, led me about 5 years ago to think that they had shell organizations under them. So they received federal grants at the main Leadership Foundation, and then they siphoned them off to all these little leadership foundations locally, like Billings Leadership Foundation. And for me, when I found that there wasn't, in some of the little ones around the nation, there wasn't really anything being done yet, money being funneled to them, led me to think that it was pretty much not on the up and up. And so I've became involved in trying to bring that to light, but also when Matt refused to serve folks that were non-sober in 2018, and the mission had been serving non-sober folks, especially when it got freezing and below. And he refused. So then a group of us, formed My Backyard to take up to take on some of the sheltering in 3 churches downtown. I mean, it was a shock that he would do that. Number one, call himself Reverend. Number two, and associated with Christ. And it was a shock that the city was letting them do that, and the county commissioners were. Nobody was interested. I was the lone voice, it seems like, for since 2018 at least, in bringing the issues and the questions and to the county commissioners and to the city through Gazette and through City Council and through the County Commission. People were quite happy to sit back and accept that MRM was the same as it had been in the past and funnel money to him and accept Matt at his word because they had trusted MRM for many years before that. And nobody listened to me. The commissioners, he tried to get the commissioners to shut down the hub, and which they succeeded at, but to funnel all the unhoused services and mental health services under Matt's umbrella, particularly this leadership foundation. And it really hurt the community. The hub got closed, and that was the resource for folks. Not only a mailing address they could use, but just a place where people were basically willing to help them. And so over the years, when Matt applied for money or when there was an issue that I was hearing about on the streets, about their people's treatment at the MRM, and when again looking at the police calls around the South Side and noticing that there were high assault and sexual assault charge or situation police calls at MRM in the vicinity, then I began raising that issue. But many issues, and I brought it to their council, to his board of directors, and nothing ever done, no response, really. So yeah. My take on it is that whatever he brought to MRM is not going to go away, and that they need to replace that board. The board allowed him to do all this and sat back, even when I talked to them directly, sat back and did nothing. So I'm not sure the future of MRM is going to be any better than it has been. I hope for the best, but it's going to take the community like you folks to get involved in the nitty gritty and hold them responsible, because these folks are our neighbors.
So what is the situation? What is the situation now, Catherine? Do we have any hope that we'll be able to take care of the, as you call it, non-sober people that are homeless in Billings this winter?
Well, the care of them last winter wasn't very good. Many of them that we saw at Showers, and I lived on the south side, and I saw people pretty much daily. Many of them were sleeping out rough all winter long, and would come to Showers with fingers that were frostbitten. We had people come that had their toes amputated from being frostbitten. I hope that it's a better scene. I just don't know that it will be. I don't know that the board sees these folks, these neighbors of ours. I don't know that the board sees them as people that they want to really care for. I hope one member of the board at MRM cut hair at the Showers one day a week, and she heard a lot from me and from the people taking the showers, and yet nothing nothing was done. So unless,
So,
and Kari probably knows the more current situation there, but
oh, there's Kari. Well, one last question, then we'll go to Kari. What do we need to do?
be
What has to
active.
what has to happen in order to make it work?
Community's got to be active. You guys have to, all of us have to be active and care about these folks. They need advocates, um, and all of us have to do what Kari and I have done, and look at the nitty gritty. Look at them. Look at how they're operating. Listen to the folks that go there for help, and look at the crime reports around there. Look at investigate. And keep track of how they're spending their money and be active, and I think that's the biggest thing. But the other thing is to put together a barrier shelter, make sure there's always one available within the community, and that's a lot of work.
And we don't have one now
Mm-mm.
because
No,
no.
no, you
Okay.
don't. You have no reliable shelter really for a lot of the folks, particularly those folks that are in wheelchairs, those folks that have severe mental illness. There's ways to accommodate, and it's folks that are on the outs in the society that have issues, um, where they cannot get around well, they cannot function well. And it's those issues that the MRM is, at least for the last 7 years, 8 years, put those people out on the streets,
Yeah.
not caring whether they lived or died.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's really
I think
community
that's
responsibility.
that's exactly my understanding. So I appreciate your articulating that so well. But
Yeah.
Carrie, so welcome. I apologize. Something's wrong with my computer. I got a new computer uh, con contraption here, and it's not working right. So I can't figure out how to get on so you can see me, but I guess you can hear me. It's my understanding. So let's proceed. And I was going to give you a little bit of background about Carrie. Carrie has certainly a very impressive background of work in this area. She's, I think, from Billings originally, but worked in TV news and in both in Billings and Portland and Seattle. And in Washington State, she was a legislative assistant to one of the chairs of the important committees on health and things of that nature, and also on appropriations. And she is an author of a lot of housing issues. She was a chairman and vice chairman of the Early Head Start Policy Committee, the on the board of the Coalition Continuum of Care, and a steering committee of a Citizens Advisory Board. And she was project manager of a number of things. She was a member of ADAB as well, and I think a lot of other things that she's been working on and trying to do some help here in the community. Continuing of care and substance abuse is one of her focuses. So maybe we can have her tell us a little bit about what she's doing and how she sees what Catherine just told us about. We'll turn it over to you, Carrie. And I'm so glad you could join us.
Yeah, sorry for being late. I take my kiddo to school and they don't open till 7:40. So this was the quickest I could make it here. And thank you to Catherine, who's been my steady partner in crime all the way back to our days at Northern Plains, organizing on environmental issues. And so she's someone I can always, geez, it's going to get me choked up. Someone I can always count on to be there for this community, even though she's moved away. Gee, mini Christmas. Sorry. Whew. I miss Catherine. Can you tell? So anyway, The introduction Tom gave, some of that is relevant. I did work in the legislature in Washington State for a chair of Health and Human Services, and she was an appropriations chair. So that's really why I'm able to understand the way that the money flows and read these big, intensive documents and be able to really sort through what kind of what actually is going on with money, right? So when you look at all the stuff that we track down with the Montana Rescue Mission, Leadership Foundation, and others in this community, that is really part of why I was able to do that, is because of my background in the legislature working for a fiscal chair. But really, I'm just someone in the community who cares enough to take action when I see something that isn't right. I speak up, even if it's not popular. And, like whether it's the Police Advisory Board or the Energy and Conservation Commission, I see a place where people might want to take action, but they don't necessarily know the steps to move forward. The same kind of with low barrier shelter. I saw a void and some need for someone to step in and be able to do some of the logistics, right? And so that's really all that I've done. It's something that any of you can do. It's just a matter of saying, instead of who can I find to solve this problem, it's what can I do to begin to solve the problem myself? What skills do I have, right? And so that's how I got involved. I did have some experience. I saw some really great housing first programs in Seattle and even Portland before I really knew what they were, that worked. And that brought dignity to people, that inspired them to want to take steps themselves without having to have someone else's benchmarks for success put in front of them. And so I knew that when I moved back here. And when I moved back here in 2015, I did so, having been born and raised here, having gained some skills outside of Billings, and knowing that I wanted to contribute those skills to this community. So I knew that I wanted to make positive change. I didn't know it would be necessarily in homelessness or housing, or that I certainly did not know I was going to have a child and be a mom and that I would be on a Head Start policy council. But really, it just boils down to when there's been a need and I see that I can have some skills to bring to the equation, then I just kind of step up and meet that need. So how I got involved with this whole Matt Lundgren and MRM debacle, I don't know what Matt did to get fired. I can tell you my perspective of the things that I know that he did wrong, and that his other members of leadership, including his board, should have done differently, right? So I got involved with this Matt and MRM debacle when I was working at the Mental Health Center, which at the time was operating the program, The Hub, downtown next to where the Holiday is now. When I interviewed for that job, it was at that time when the county commissioners were planning to take the mental health mill levy funding from the Hub and the Crisis Center and repurpose it and reallocate at least some portion of it, maybe all of it, to MRM. And the way that they were trying to kind of politically force that was through telling the Hub and or the Crisis Center that they should come and co-locate their services at the MRM in what was then the Grady's Attic building. And they created this leadership foundation that they said was gonna, be the umbrella that all of us operated under. So not only were we gonna co-locate our services in a building that was dilapidated, frankly condemned at this point, but also they were gonna have us co-locate all of our operations under Leadership Foundation. So at that point, when I interviewed for that job, I told the people in the room, hey, if you want to give in to the county commissioners and close the Hub and, change your programs, I'm probably not the person for this job. If you want to push back on the narrative, make sure they understand why the Hub is important, expand the program, maybe move it to a different area of town and have me help you raise the money to do that, I'm your gal. And they hired me. And I immediately went to work on a campaign plan. Unfortunately, at the time, Dennis Pittman, county commissioner at that time, was also the chair of the Mental Health Center board. And so he was privy to all of this campaign plan information that I put out, and he could see that I was going to unravel this web that they had planned over there at the county with MRM. So he resigned from the Mental Health Center's board as chair in an op-ed to the Billings Gazette, in the paper, in the Sunday paper. He didn't give us a letter. He just resigned in the Sunday paper, and he said he was going to be making sure that all this money everybody was held accountable, and this became where all that money that voters in 2010 voted on to go specifically to, named on the ballot, the hub and the crisis center, that's when they began to start to reallocate that funding to other organizations. Now, it did not go to Matt and MRM directly at that time because there was a lot of community outcry, not just from myself, Robin Driscoll at that time, who had just been a county commissioner and had just become state party chair, wrote a joint op-ed with Margie McDonald, who I believe was a state senator at that time. There was a lot of community outcry. And so there was no way the commissioners could get away with just giving the money straight to MRM, a faith-based organization who had never really taken much public tax money at that point and was still definitely committing religious discrimination. So what they did was they created this plan called the Mill and the Match through Substance Abuse Connect. And I'm not going to go into it too much because you can read more about it in the op-ed that was sent out to you all that Catherine and I co-authored, and it has links to everything that we say. So when MRM or their board or someone says this is a difference of opinion, it's not our opinions. These are well-documented facts by journalists in town, by public documents that we link to, city council agendas, county commissioner reports, right? These are not our opinions. This is what happened. We just took the time to document it for everybody, right? So that's how I got involved, was really to keep the hub from losing its funding. And then I saw what they were doing and I became invested in tracking that money. And I've tracked that money and disclosed to the county commissioners and the city council all along the way which consultants in town have gotten paid, the names of their companies, the individuals who are profiting off of these, for lack of a better term, schemes. Because it's not going to direct services, right? Your money, my money, our tax money is going to CEOs' salaries, consultants' salaries. And Matt is not the only person making $275,000 a year. There are consultants being paid by multiple nonprofits in town $125 an hour. And when you break down Matt's salary, he was making $137 an hour. Those same people will say that Matt was wrong for taking that salary, and he was. But they're also not right for taking $125 an hour to coordinate these funding plans, if you will, and then nobody ever delivers on them. And a perfect example of that I'm going to point out to you all is the crisis response unit, right? Just the money I tracked on that alone was $3 million. And this is just Department of Justice money and the Mill and the Match. $3 million to create a crisis response unit. That once they finally got it off the ground, and they would not have done that had we not been pounding the pavement every day. Where is the crew? Where is the crew? Where is the crew? Once they finally did get it off the ground, that only operated for 8 months. $3 million. We need that service. My problem was never with the crisis response unit. It's that we desperately needed a crisis response unit and a low barrier shelter. The system that works is pretty simple. It's a three-legged stool. You need to have someone to call who's going to answer the call, someone to respond, ideally a crisis response unit, not uniformed police officers if you're in crisis, and you need somewhere for them to go. And the police didn't have anywhere to take them when they would respond because Montana Rescue Mission would say, no, thank you. And the crisis center would be at capacity. And so a low barrier shelter was a place for people to go. And had we all worked together as a community, instead of people being so desperate to fund their consultants, their salaries, their whatever that it was, right? Not everybody came to this conversation like Catherine and I, who just wanted to meet the need and were willing to give our skills and really had no financial stake in it. There's a lot of people, both individuals who make money, right? And also organizations who are funded to solve this problem. And if it's solved, they're out of business. And I'm sorry to say it's so blatant like that, but that's been my experience. And I don't feel that MRM is the lone ranger in this. I do feel they are the worst offender, but they're just the tip of the iceberg in this community of the nonprofit financial suck, for lack of a better term again. Now that's my opinion, but.
So what do we need to do about it? What should we do at this point?
Well, I think we have a great opportunity with the new council coming in. It looks like we're going to have some different perspectives. And so we need to make sure that they understand what is really happening, because there are people who are paid a lot of money to tell them to sell them a bill of goods simply so that they can continue this funding right? And we not only need to point out why that's not working, we have to offer an alternative. We can't just say anything but MRM and then there's no low barrier shelter. So if that comes back to simply my backyard, like Catherine and others organized with local churches, all the way up to, you know, a temporary winter shelter, or ideally, what we really need is a permanent 24/7 low barrier shelter year round. But at a minimum, that has to operate, you know, in the evenings to fill the gap once St. Vincent de Paul closes and those folks have nowhere to go. So all weekend long, plus evenings. Because MRM, I do not believe that MRM is going to change their tune. What we're seeing isn't a new leaf from MRM. It's more of the same with different names. And that's a continuation of what we saw all along. It went from Oksana to Vanessa and Tito. You know, now it's Glenn Fournier, and I don't have any more faith in him than I did in any of the others, to be frank. And certainly, as long as the same board who has protected Matt and protected this community all along isn't being held to task, they're not gonna change. Nobody, you know, we get the questions about what did Matt do to get fired? And they are not answering that. They are not being transparent about what was really going on there. We know for sure financial wrongdoing, for sure. It is now looking very likely that there was sexual misconduct that occurred, which is like very disturbing, but I don't know about that myself, so I'll just put that out there. And they aren't there. What they will say is it wasn't those things. Well, then what was it? Because, you know, this board is covering up. And I think the biggest thing is that leadership foundation, that is a political organization. Whether they want to say that or not, they claim to be a nonprofit, but they do have a political leaning, which Catherine probably got into a little bit. And so as long as we have that type of decision making and power structure in our community that's going to funnel not only public money, but private and everything else into these religious nonprofits specifically, and other religious organizations, you know, we're all losing in that sort of an equation. I think we can mostly all agree with that here. So
Can I say, interject
Go ahead.
something too? You heard the name Off the Streets. That was founded by volunteer, 3 churches and all volunteers. The name was taken by an organization that is nonprofit, but that organization, in my view, has many of the same problems. So when we talk about MRM being so dysfunctional, a lot of folks will turn to, oh, well, we've got Off the Streets. No, it has similar problems. It is also very convoluted, and people report abuse and all kinds of things out of that. And I'm not sure how the money's funneled through that, but it's a complex system. And
Is Off the Street a viable organization now? Is it still active?
it's
well,
active, but I don't feel it's viable. Sorry, Catherine, you go ahead. I didn't mean
no,
to.
I don't know. It's hard to know. Off the Streets is convoluted. It's not clear what they're doing to actually provide for folks, other than to have some motel rooms, which they charge $500 a month to share one small motel room with 3 other people. So they charge $2,000 a month for a small motel room that doesn't have a kitchen and that kind of thing. It's the same thing as what Kari was talking about, that you have people coming in saying, we've got the answer, but then just taking money. It's easy money, apparently. And it's easy to say you're going to do that and then not provide.
Yeah. How are they funded at this point? Are they funded?
So this is the thing that I think it is easy. It is easy money to get, right? But it's not easy to provide the services. It's actually quite difficult. right? Now, the formula that we kind of set up and improved along the way from the original Off the Streets project all the way to the Shelter First, right? We have figured out a way that is relatively low cost and sustainable for what it was, right? It wasn't perfect by any means, but I think a lot of people look at this and think, oh, I can meet that need, and there's money to do it, right? A perfect example was the $750,000 give for emergency shelter, which both Off the Streets and MRM applied for, right? But emergency shelter, what they meant by that was a low barrier shelter, a shelter where anyone in any emergency could come in, right? And so I think there's a disconnect between, and perhaps that might be a little bit on us because we made it look easy or something. I don't know. But it's not easy. I can say that. There are the complexities that come with operating a low barrier shelter, just in terms of legal liability, right? It's very complex. And to offer a place where dignity and respect comes first requires training staff completely differently than a lot of folks in town are trained right now. And so, but that was something we conscientiously did. So it's clearly not impossible. But I do think, there's two things happening with Off the Streets. One is the organization that says it intends to operate low barrier shelter and has not yet done so to date, even though it was funded in 2021, I believe. So we're talking about 4 years now, not one single low barrier service provided to date. And then there is the Big Five Motel, which is now called the Fourth Avenue Inn, which Craig Bartell, founder of Off the Streets nonprofit, former site manager of our Off the Streets project at the Continuum of Care, right? And now for-profit owner of the Fourth Avenue Inn, what his operation is doing, right? And so what Catherine is talking about is the 40 or so rooms that are not subletted by Off the Streets, the nonprofit, in which people are double, triple, quadruple bunking, the goal being to get them up to $2,000. So if somebody can afford $1,000 and has a roommate who can afford $1,000, then they only have to double bunk because they're at that $2,000. And you're thinking to yourself, where did $2,000 for a motel room come from? Well, that came from the Montana Emergency Rental Assistance, which was a very great program that helped a lot of people in the time of need, including myself. I was helped by Mira, right? It helped our friend Bill Meyer, who we would not have been able to house any other way without Mira. But these hotel owners, these property owners, but especially these hotel owners, got wind of the fact that they could get $2,200 a month for offering these hotels to people through Mira, and they wanted to continue to make that profit stream after Mira funding was gone. And Craig is continuing to do that. And that is a for-profit, make no mistake about it. It's a way to run a business, and that's his prerogative. But let's not pretend then that we're doing this for the good of the community and that we aren't further exploiting people in poverty who don't have any better option. It also is not what I would consider fit for human habitation because it's cockroach infested, bed bug infested. There's been times there hasn't been running water, right? So is that acceptable? Is that better than being on the streets? I suppose so, but I don't think it's acceptable. And I don't think we, the public, should be giving tax dollars to that, certainly, right? If private organizations want to prop that up or private individuals, that's their prerogative. You can give wherever you want to give, but I don't think our public dollars, they need to go to the only way that a low barrier shelter and permanent supportive housing, which we need both things, the only way that will operate in a long-term way, it's only sustainable when the city and the county contribute their share of what they save on law enforcement, jail, and response back into a more equitable system that is more cost effective. If the city and county don't contribute, it's not sustainable. It is not, there is no way to do it without city or county funds, or we would have continued to do that. So you can't have them giving all these money to the Family Justice Center and the Off the Streets and MRM's emergency shelter, and also trying to sustainably operate, even if, and make, we operated that shelter for 4 months at $186,000. We served 222 unique individuals in that period of time at Shelter First. So we can do this, probably less than $600,000 a year in a 12-hour overnight only cycle, right? We can do that. But not if you don't have 600,000 and if everybody else is saying that they're going to meet the need instead. So that's the long and the short. And a part of it is us saying to our representatives, that's not what we want to have funded. We see this as a need, not just Catherine speaking up every night at council, but all of us speaking up often. Where is a low barrier shelter? We heard they're turning over a new leaf at MRM. Why are we still seeing people on the streets? Do not fund them until we see that there are no people on the streets and that the need is being met. Then we can talk about how much funding they need to continue to meet that need in that way. But right now, nobody is doing that.
So how do you respond to the question, to the position that Matt took, and that is, we can't help these uh, people if they're drunk. They got to sober up first, then we can help them. But that's not our position. We can't do this. You can't do anything with uh, people that are not sober all the time. What do we do with the alcoholics that are on the streets that don't do anything about their sobriety? That's
And
their, I think they're saying.
one of the things that with MRM specifically was that Christ-centered stance that they put out there in everything that they did, and it's opposite of Christ's stance to reject, kick out folks that are the most needy. That
Well, that is,
the
that is
worldview that they're not worth sheltering is not Christian, but it's not faithful. It's not ethical. It's not something that that other countries find as true. Other societies support their people with great issues. We think everybody has to earn their way, and that is, again, at least that from my point of view, that's anti-Christian and shouldn't even be associated with a Christian organization.
yeah,
Yeah.
but that doesn't. Well, so what's the problem? What's the solution to the alcoholic problem?
Well, I mean,
There's
that we definitely know, right? Housing first. That's very clear from the evidence over years of trying sobriety first programs and them failing, and years of trying housing first programs and them succeeding, right? I always like to say, what's the difference between an alcoholic that's going to jail for being on the streets and an alcoholic who goes home at night, right? The fact that they're going home at night. That is literally the only difference between how we're treating people on the streets with their sobriety and our judgment that they must get sober first, that is the absolute biggest problem they're facing, right? And the reality of all the things that they're actually facing, right? And a perfect example of that, as Catherine and I, and this is well documented as well, we helped a gentleman named Bill Meyer, and I have heard every single provider in town tell us why Bill Meyer can't be helped, right? I heard him called untouchable. I heard him, I followed him in a cab to 3 different locations one day, loading his walker up for him to get help at all 3 locations, for him to be turned away at the 3rd location and told that he didn't really want help. That's not a man who doesn't want help, right? He woke up early. We went to all those appointments. I followed him. He wanted help, but it's not help on Matt Lundgren's terms. What makes Matt Lundgren the decider of what's right and wrong? Bill Meyer considered himself an alcoholic, and perhaps he was. I'm not a psychologist, but I first met him trying to get him into shelter when we had that temporary shelter in the basement of First Church. And I said, would you like to have shelter tonight? Oh, sure, but nobody's going to take me. Well, what do you mean nobody's going to take you? We accept everybody there. You just got to go to the crisis center and get screened. I'm not going to the crisis center to wait outside for 4 hours on a bench, which had been happening, truthfully, at that point, right? And I said, well, what if I can make sure that you're seen right away at the crisis center? You can't do that. And I called Marcy to make sure he was going to get seen right away. Well, I'm not taking it and walking over there, you know. What if I can get you a ride? You can't do that. Well, we had transportation at that time, thank God. So I got him a ride. And that's how our relationship started. And you know how much trust I built with Bill Meyer just by giving him a ride to the crisis center, making sure he got screened and that he was able to get into shelter that night? That opened the door where everyone else had given up on Bill Meyer, who had been on the streets for 40 years since he was 15 years old. He was born and raised in Montana. He came to Billings from Helena. People called him a transient. He was not a transient. He was a Billings resident. He worked at the Crystal Lounge. He worked at the Northern. He worked at the Doubletree, right? When he could work. But he couldn't always work because, yes, he did have problems with alcohol that sometimes were worse than others. And when I met him, he simply drank 2 Colt 45s a night. And the reason he didn't want to go to shelter was because all of his stuff was stashed up the way. And I said, like, well, is it going to be in there in the morning? You know, wouldn't it be great to start your day with your 2 things of booze fresh? He's like, I don't drink during the day. You don't drink during the day, but you're an alcoholic. Yeah, I don't drink during the day. So this is who we're talking about. Bill's primary obstacles that kept him from getting service, the truth, as we found out, was that he was not able to toilet himself. He had incontinence issues. That is why he was being rejected from service provider after service provider after service provider, because who wants to clean that up? Nobody, right? But we figured it out at the low barrier shelter. We sure did. We figured it out when we put him into the Broadway Inn or whatever that place was called. Catherine, you would know the name. We
that
figured it
I
out
went to every day.
you know, once we got him housed. And truly Catherine figured it out because she was the one who did a lot of the direct care, because I'm disabled and have a child. I couldn't do that part. What I could do was try to manage these services and try to keep people accountable and try to line up all the, you know, systemic stuff, right? But Bill Meyer, when he died, he had a roof over his head. And you're not going to convince me, sober or not, that he didn't deserve that he didn't deserve that dignity, that wasn't better for our taxpayer dollars, that wasn't better for the business owners downtown, that wasn't better for Bill. He had a roof over his head. No, he was not sober. And did he need to be for us to help him? I disagree with that greatly. And I think we saved a ton of money. Bill was on the chronic utilizer list of Downtown Billings Association. He had had 48 times he was discharged from the ER in a 18-month period back to the streets, one single ER. 48
And he
times.
had something like 90 charges for trespassing against him as well.
Trespassing, public intoxication,
Yes.
public urination because he had no bathroom and also was incontinent.
Jaywalking.
Everything you can think of, right? And so that was how we treated him for 40 years. Can you imagine what we spent to treat Bill as less than human for 40 years while we all walked by? Anybody who ever dealt with Bill, he was crotchety, but everybody liked him, right? He had his lady at the bank. You know, that's what I say to people. And I know that's a little bit long and drawn out, but that's the truth.
Well, I think that's important, and I really appreciate your bringing all of that to us. We've got to do something. I agree. Let's go to questions. Carol, you had a question?
Well, I have an affirmation, is what I do, because I've been on the streets twice, and I've found a lot of that. I went to MRM when they were building the new extension, and I needed a place for that night. Because I was just dropped off out of the hospital after my accident with nothing. They just threw me away, is what they did. But anyway, so I went there and they came and said, well, here we are. And it was an open room, no separation of sexes. I had to sleep on the floor. And I says, I can't sleep on the floor. It's just impossible. I can't get up. I wouldn't be able to get up in the morning. I had a walker. And they said, well, we don't have anything upstairs and all this stuff. And I says, okay. So I left. By the grace of God and my friends that know me, when they found out the difficulties I was having we finally went to a motel room, and the people that moved me in there says, Carol, we got to get you out of this motel room. This is not going to do you any good. You're going to get sick or something because there's cockroaches and stuff. And so, to make a long story short, they I ended up being they took over my motel rooms, and then I found out I got kicked out because I'm a Billings resident. Because I don't understand that. I just can't ever understand it that anybody who's from Billings cannot get a motel room. But I got a feeling that if they had like a couple $1,000, about $5,000 at the bank, or even more than that, they might. But so there's a lot of stuff that's working against the homeless people here. Not only just misconceptions, ignorance, but hate, just hating them. There's no reason to hate these people. And everybody says, well, you need to get a job, you need to make money. And I says, I did. And they took it all. I lost my house. I didn't get only $50,000 for a $275,000 house. That didn't last very long, you know. But I made it last very long. But it's still, it's a horrible situation. But yet I know that because of my situation, and when I had a car and I could sleep in, I was able to do better that way with help. And I met people when they knew that knew my face and knew that I was in trouble. They were saying, "Oh, really?" And I says, "Yeah, this is happening to a lot of people." So they helped me. They'd give me hot chocolate at a. They do all kinds of nice stuff. And I said, so there is a faction out there. It's just they don't know how to connect the dots to what is actually going on for everybody, and don't know how all your money. My friend the other day just says, I'm not giving money to any people anymore, any corporations. I'm going out and finding out who needs some money. I'm going to give it to them because I know them. I know it's going to go to their help, and I don't have to fund it to somebody else who doesn't put my money where it needs to go.
Very good. Thank you, Carol. I think that's really helpful. Let's go on. Ruth, you had a question?
You muted?
Yes, Dennis Pittman has just been elected to the city council. What results do you think are going to come out of that as far as sort of homeless are concerned?
Well, he was elected, but so was Amy Aguirre and
Right.
Andrew
Lindley and
thank you,
Finley.
Jim.
and
Remember, and then potentially Mike Nelson, which
Mike Nelson is apparently the new mayor.
I'm not going to say how I feel about Mike Nelson on homelessness, but I will say it. I don't think he's going to be a great leader on homelessness, but I think it's just that he's woefully uneducated. And we all have the opportunity, especially those of you who backed him, to educate him on this. If he's going to be our mayor, he really needs to understand this issue a lot better than he does as the Northern Hotel owner, which I think he believes he really understands it well from that perspective. And that's only one very, very niche perspective, right? So you've got people balancing it out. The fact that Jennifer Owen is not going to be on council or mayor, if that happens, please, dear Lord, if you pray, whatever, put out all that out, right? That's going to be great. Because that was not a helpful railroad we had going on there, right? We still got Aspenlighter there, though, and I think we also ended up with Pittman, like you said. He's,
we got Mark Nicholson also.
Oh yeah, that's right. I was like, there was three. So that's some of them were just continuing to keep, like Mark Nicholson kept Ed Gulick's seat, right? But I think we have opportunity, right? And anytime there's new opportunity. And it is a nonpartisan body, so we do have to really take it at its word that it's nonpartisan and educate everybody regardless of what their party values or party line might be, right? I think, and Dennis Pittman included, make sure that he knows we see what he's done in the past and we aren't going to be quiet about it this time either, right? If he's going to try to ramrod something like that through again, which it was infinitely easier as a county commissioner. I think he knows that. We all know that, right? But not impossible. And so I don't love his influence, certainly. I don't love that we voted for him, even though it was out in the papers, the role that he played in this financial misdoing or whatever you want to call it, right? I don't know. So,
Okay.
But I
Very
think
good.
I think too, to not get discouraged, to be out there, educate, make things public, and if they turn their backs on you, literally, just keep talking and call them on it. And it's really important to be active, and you're not going to get a lot of praise for it, maybe, but it's important to be active and tell the truth and tell the needs of the community.
Yeah, the other
and I
thing,
agree that
Mike
I think,
Nelson.
Catherine and I,
Excuse me, but tenacity is the
I'm
soul
sorry.
of success.
okay, let's go on to the next question,
No,
Pam.
I have more. Mike
Oh,
Nelson has said that he would give anybody who's homeless a job at the hotel. They're desperate for people to clean the rooms and things like that, and they pay well.
I
So I,
certainly,
I,
I do appreciate that. And I think that that's a valid thing to say, right? Very valid. And we should definitely exercise that when we have people who can work. But Bill Meyer wasn't able to work.
no,
Carol, right? Myself, I'm on disability. I may look very healthy to you, but I'm not able to work. And that's why I'm really passionate about these work requirements. I don't think they're meant for the sickest among us, right? Which could be any of us tomorrow.
right.
We're all going to age at some point. And so I just don't want to see the work, right? And then that be the excuse of, well, I'm willing to offer a job. I asked Mike Nelson at a forum, hey, when you model your hotel rooms and you're getting ready to turn those over, not daily as you clean them, like, because that's what he tried to say. Well, daily, there's only an hour. No, I'm saying when you remodel a block of rooms, 100 rooms, floor by floor, let homeless people stay in the ones before you remodel them, because they can't, this whole notion of why they can't have hotel rooms because they might trash them. Well, what's the worst that's going to happen if you were going to remodel it anyway? Right? I realize that's a small thing, but it is a legitimate thing that Mike Nelson, as the owner of the Northern Hotel, could do if he were truly committed to providing a space, right? And it doesn't have to be. If he doesn't want to let low barrier people in, he doesn't have to, although, right? Like, certainly he's dealing with them on his front step, whether he lets them in or not. So how much
Right.
better do you think those people will treat your business if you gave them a place to stay? There is some
well,
of this back and forth that happens. So I'm not saying it's his job alone to solve. I'm just saying I think he's got a long way to go to be educated on how this really works.
we've got we're just about out of time. We got several people. We want to make sure we get their comments. I just want to say one thing, that one of the reasons we had so much trouble is the fact that we didn't get an honest answer. I asked I asked Matt Lindgren many times, what about the people who are not sober? Are you taking care of them? And he insisted, oh yes, we are. And that's what he told everybody else. And that's why they got all the money. At any rate, that's enough of that. Let's go to Pam. I want your perspective, Pam.
Well, I just have a question actually.
Okay.
I, both of you have commented that we need to replace the board. I know how you replace the council, you vote. I don't know how you replace a nonprofit board. So what are your ideas
Don't give them any
for
money.
that? Say that again.
You don't give them any state and federal money. And city money. That's the
Or
first
any
thing.
money, right? Like any money. Say until, and I would name names, honestly, because I can tell you the top people who've covered for Matt. It's Tim Mascarena, it's Russ Fagg, I'm going to call out Kristen Rapaz because her husband was an architect who made money, right? I think they have business dealings. And so I think we have to not only say we're not giving money to MRM, Tim Mascarena, I'm not letting you sell my house. Russ Fagg, I'm not giving you any law contracts. Kristen Rapaz, I'm not coming to your hair salon, and I'm not going to let your husband be my architect. We do have that ability to influence things beyond just the way that we fund the MRM. And I think we do need to be clear to city council and the county until there is at least half of that board turns over, because they've all been there forever. This is like Cheryl Shandy's board at the food bank. It's the same old thing, right? How do you replace that board? Well, I don't have an answer for that. I guess you can go to the IRS. We could all begin to file complaints with the IRS. Catherine would probably know more about that.
Well, and the other thing is a review of MRM by a financial auditor found that they don't, number one, train the board on a yearly basis, but they don't review the board, and the board is not functioning to review what the director does, and to have some oversight of the operations.
Is Russ Fagg really on that board?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
I,
He
I
has
didn't
been,
know that.
he was the one
Yes.
appointed by Mayor Cole to be the negotiator as to how the funding was going to flow, because I would not shut my mouth about MRM. And so, we always got to balance this crazy lady out with some sort of right-wing whatever, that has happened to me more than one time. So that's why I feel confident saying it. And I do like Mayor Cole as a mayor, but I don't agree with balancing people out because we don't like what they have to say and we think they might be too liberal or something. Like, I'm a Billings, Montana girl. I was born and raised here. I'm a Montanan. That's what my values are, Montanan.
Well,
Okay,
you have to look too at the board members and see what their ties are. Like Kari said, Kristen Rapaz, her husband, was the architect for this whole project that they just finished. And yet she sits on the board. And as good as the services she tries to give folks in cutting hair and that kind of stuff, that still, to me, is a real obvious signal that there needs to be some assessment of that board.
anything else, Pam, that you wanted to mention?
Well, the other question that I have that's kind of related, Kari had mentioned that you really, not today, but earlier, that you really need to separate out the Friendship House. So I think one of the reasons that the money all flowed there is that people perceive that it's a religious commitment, and so everything else is blinded. But what are the disadvantages of Friendship House being under the MRM, and how did that happen?
Well,
Because
it happened
of that.
because it happened during this 2019, we're going to merge everything under this leadership umbrella. And they had to have an example of something that had already done it, which was the Friendship House. Right. And so they, in order to say that the hub and the crisis center should come under there, they were like, but look, we already have things under this umbrella, the Friendship House and MRM. Right. And so, but the fact is that it was the same board of the Leadership Foundation. It was the same board of MRM. It was the same board of Friendship House. And very clearly that board, trying to oversee 3 different organizations, was not able to oversee at least one of them very well. And a whole lot of wrongdoing happened. And in the meantime, what happens is Friendship House, that has been a legitimate entity like MRM long before Matt Lundgren for many, many years, is in jeopardy. Right? Because it's associated now and under this Leadership Foundation umbrella. And so the easiest thing to me that can be done by this board to signal that they mean business, that they're truly going to turn over a new leaf, is to collapse the Leadership Foundation, which was never necessary in the first place. It was simply Matt's effort to consolidate power and funding, and that's it. And then to move Friendship House. If you're not trying to consolidate power and funding, why do you have such a need to oversee both organizations when you failed as a board overseeing one of them? Why are you so desperate to keep that under that umbrella? Like, what's going on with that? If they're serious, they will do that. That will be an easy move that can be made, no problem. Yeah, it's about money, Carol. You're right. It is about money because they get oversight dollars. They get these this overhead or administrative cut of all the money that flows through. And it's not just Leadership Foundation that does that. Riverstone does that. Homefront does that. HRDC does that. I'm not saying they don't provide services. I'm just saying this fiscal sponsorship overhead cut of administrative off the top of all these tax dollars is happening. And that's what the Leadership Foundation did and does. And we don't need that. We don't need money to be going to administrative oversight that isn't even working. Layers and layers of bureaucracy that just confuses everybody so that you don't actually know where the money goes. Because that's really what it's intended to do, right?
I think, unfortunately, we lost Julie. I'm sorry, but Patricia, I'd be anxious to hear your